Growing up in a rural area of Australia, it was a quiet place with not much to do. Our closest neighbours were half an hour away, so it was mostly just my older brother Stephen and I that would play on weekends. Oftentimes, we would spend hours trekking deeper into the bush that surrounded our property in search of places to fish or swim. I was 11 at the time, and my brother was 14. It was school holidays for us, which meant if we finished our chores, we could do whatever we wanted for the whole rest of the day. Our parents weren't too worried about our adventures as long as we got back in time for dinner. On this day, my brother led the way, and rather than the aimless wandering we would usually get up to, he wanted to show me something that he'd been working on while I'd been staying at my friend's house. It took a few hours of walking, but we finally arrived near a creek. He'd cut a decrepit tree down, and he'd used the log to make a ladder leading up a large red gum tree. The branches were sturdy enough to hold us, and we spent the day diving off it. Towards the afternoon, I was skipping rocks while my brother sat lazily on the branches. I was searching for some more rocks when I heard a branch snap off in the distance. It got my attention, but I didn't think too much of it. There were always plenty of snakes, lizards, and kangaroos around, but if you left them alone and kept a safe distance, they usually did the same. I continued searching when I heard leaves rustling. As I looked up, a pink shoe appeared from behind the tree, and a small body followed it. About 20 meters from me, there was a girl standing amongst the trees, just staring at me. She looked about Stephen's age. I remember thinking it was weird how pale she was, especially in this area. Everyone had some sort of tan from the sun. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I was rather surprised to see someone else out here, as we lived so far from anyone else. After a moment, I called out to her, and she started to walk towards us. I yelled to my brother, who climbed down to see who she was. The closer she got, the more I noticed how dirty her clothes were. And not only that, but they were way too big for her small frame. She was a few meters from us when she froze in place and continued to stare. My brother introduced us both, but still, she said nothing. I noticed her hands were shaking, almost as if she feared us. After a few awkward glances between each other, I told her that if she wanted to play with us, she could at least tell us her name. Her straight face suddenly became animated, and she spoke quickly. "I'm Bethany. Mother always told me to introduce myself. That's my problem, you know. I never listen." My brother asked her where she lived and why we had never seen her at school. She told us that she was visiting her aunt. My brother asked her what her auntie's name was, but Bethany said she didn't know. She just called her Auntie. It was strange, but we just moved on and kept talking. Well, Stephen and I did most of the talking, and she just stood there, awkwardly. Being late in the afternoon, Stephen told me that we needed to head back for dinner, or we'd be late. Bethany suddenly became more vocal and she asked us, "Do you want to see something cool?" She smiled after she said this, but it seemed unnatural. This was the first time her face had shown any emotion, and it made me feel uncomfortable. It still does when I think about it. My brother asked her what she wanted to show us, and to this day, I could still hear her voice in my head, word for word. "A dead body." I couldn't think of anything I wanted to see less than a dead body, but it did catch Stephen's interest. "Where'd you find it?" he asked. When Bethany answered, she spoke so softly I could barely hear her. "Not far from here, if you want to see it." I didn't like this at all. My brother would always make fun of me for being a wimp, but not only did I not want to see a dead body, I also didn't want to get in trouble. Bethany insisted that it wouldn't take long, and Stephen told me that I could go home if I was scared. I begged him to come with me, tittering on the edge of a tantrum. Stephen called me a wimp and told me to go home if I wanted, but he was going to see it. I thought about it for a moment, but I decided that I didn't want to walk home alone, and I announced that I would go, but I was not going to look at it. Bethany gave me a weak smile and, without saying anything, she started heading back through the bushes that she had appeared from. I kept a safe distance so I wouldn't accidentally see the body, but Stephen kept close to Bethany and wouldn't stop talking. I was jealous at the time, but in hindsight, he was trying to impress her. After about half an hour of walking through the bush, it became apparent that it wasn't close to us at all. Bethany said that she had just found it in an abandoned house on the property and hadn't told anyone about it yet. We walked for probably another half an hour, and the sun, it was beginning to go down. We came to a clearing where the thick trees ended and the tall grass started. A few 100 meters in front of us was a decrepit wooden farmhouse. The wood was rotting, and the rusted tin roof, it looked like it would fall off if a slight breeze passed. I had second thoughts about going in, and I watched as Stephen and Bethany began walking towards it. I had stopped walking, and I couldn't take my eyes off the house, when suddenly, the outline of a man's body moved past one of the windows. They were only 100 meters from the house when I caught up and grabbed Stephen's arm. I told him that I saw someone in there. As the words left my mouth, Bethany let out a loud whistle and attached herself to Stephen's free arm. He started yelling and spun around trying to throw her off. To my horror, a man burst out of the doorway and began to run towards us. In desperation, I started kicking and punching Bethany as Stephen started pushing her off. Eventually, her grip loosened and he ripped his arm free. I looked up and I saw the man more clearly. He was just as pale as Bethany, and he was the thinnest person that I'd ever seen. He was wielding a machete above his head as he ran towards us. Stephen screamed at me to run, and we both took off running as fast as we could. I looked over my shoulder in pure terror to see this man run past Bethany as she was getting up. All his teeth were baring. I can only describe his look as one of a predator closing in on its prey. I looked back in front of me, and I continued to run when suddenly I felt an arm grab the back of my shirt. I let out a yelp, only to find that it was Stephen, making sure that he didn't lose me. We crashed through the bushes, scraping our legs and arms as we pushed through anything that was in our way. I could hear the sticks and the brush break as the man charged through after us. I had no idea where we were going. I just continued to follow my brother, who was dragging me by my shirt. We came to a creek, and he practically threw me in, and we started swimming across as fast as we could. I heard the water splash behind us moments later. Stephen had made it to the creek bed before me, and as I got to my feet, I saw him with a rock in his hand. The man was over halfway across when Stephen started throwing rocks. He yelled at me to keep running, and I did. I heard the man scream as one of Stephen's rocks hit him. I turned around to see the man swimming back across as my brother kept on throwing rocks. The man got back out of the water, and I watched him and my brother stare at each other. The look this man gave us, it was one of absolute evil and hatred. Stephen turned and started running towards me. I saw Bethany joining the man on the side of the creek as they both continued staring. Stephen ordered me to keep running, and that's exactly what I did. Eventually, we had to stop, and Stephen dragged me to the ground as we took deep, rapid breaths, still trying to hide, just in case they were following us. It took hours to find our way back in the dark. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. When we finally got home, my mum was there, but my dad, he was out looking for us. We told her what had happened, and she locked all the doors and then called the police. This was before mobile phones, so we just sat inside with all the doors locked, waiting for my dad to come home. My mother called our neighbours, and they were freaked out. Nothing like this ever happened in our town. Our neighbours knew the house we were talking about immediately. It was on their property. When my dad got home, he sat in a chair in front of our door with his hunting rifle all night and into the morning. Our town had a very small police force, so they came to our property that night. But it took till about 8 a.m. the next morning before another 2 officers came out. When they got to the farmhouse, no one was there. They said the squatters left in a hurry because there was so much left behind. The most chilling part was that Bethany was not lying. In the house, they found the body of a woman. I only learned this as I got older, but that machete the man was wielding, it had been used before.